Hi everyone, it's Hayley here from the Gale Library, here with your Harry Potter Wednesday. So as you know, we are reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And last week we were reading chapter 3, which was called Letters from No One. And if you recall last week, we left Harry just on his birthday when there was a huge knock at the door, and they were in that cabin on a rock in the middle of the ocean because Mr. Dursley was trying to get away from all the letters from no one that kept coming for Harry, and that he wouldn't let them open them. So the Dursleys are all asleep. Harry is counted down to his birthday, if you remember, and then boom, there was a big knock at the door. So that is where we are on chapter 4, which is called The Keeper of the Keys. Boom! They knocked again. Dudley jerked awake. "Where's the cannon?" he said stupidly. There was a crash behind them, and Uncle Vernon came skidding into the room. He was holding a rifle in his hands. Now they knew what he had been doing for so long, and what the long, thin package was that he brought with him. "Who's there?" he shouted. "I warn you, I'm armed." There was a pause. Then, smash! The door was hit with such force that it swung clean off its hinges with a deafening crash landed flat on the floor. A giant of a man was standing in the doorway. His face was almost completely hidden by a long, shaggy mane of hair and a wild, tangled beard, but you could make out his eyes glinting like black beetles under all the hair. The giant squeezed his way into the hut, stooping so that his head just brushed the ceiling. He bent down, picked up the door, and fitted it easily back into its frame. The noise of the storm outside dropped a little. There's an awesome picture of Hagrid as I'm reading the illustrated version. He turned to look at them all. "Couldn't make us a cup of tea, could you, eh? It's not been an easy journey." He strode over to the sofa where Dudley sat frozen with fear. "Budge up, you great lump," said the stranger. Dudley squeaked and ran to hide behind his mother, who was crouching terrified behind Uncle Vernon. "And here's Harry," said the giant. Harry looked up into the fierce, wild, shadowy face and saw that the beetle eyes were crinkled in a smile. "Last time I saw you, you was only a baby," said the giant. "You look a lot like your dad, but you've got your mum's eyes." Uncle Vernon made a funny rasping noise. "I demand that you leave at once, sir," he said. "You are breaking and entering." "Shut up, Dursley, you great prune," said the giant. He reached over the back of the sofa, jerked the gun out of Uncle Vernon's hands, bent it into a knot as easily as if it had been made of rubber, and threw it to the corner of the room. Uncle Vernon made another funny noise, like a mouse being trodden on. "Anyway, Harry," said the giant, turning his back on the Dursleys, "very happy birthday to you. Got something for you here. Might have sat on it at some point, but it'll taste all right." From inside his pocket of his black overcoat, he pulled a slightly squashed box. Harry opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a large, sticky chocolate cake with "Happy Birthday, Harry" written on it in green icing. Harry looked up at the giant. He meant to say thank you, but the words got lost on the way into his mouth. And what he said instead was, "Who are you?" The giant chuckled. "True, I haven't introduced myself. Rubus Hagrid, keeper of the keys and grounds at Hogwarts." He held out an enormous hand and shook Harry's whole arm. "What about that then? What about that tea then?" he said, rubbing his hands together. "I'd not say no to somewhat stronger, if you've got it, mind." His eyes fell upon the empty grate with the Chival crisp packets in it, and he snorted, bent down over the fireplace. They couldn't see what he was doing, but when he drew back a second later, there was a roaring fire in there. It filled the whole damp hut with flickering light, and Harry felt the warmth wash over him as though he'd sunk into a hot bath. The giant sat down on the sofa, which sagged under his weight, and began taking all sorts of things out of his pockets of his little coat. A copper kettle, a squashy package of sausages, a poker, a teapot, several chip mugs, and a bottle of some amber liquid, which he took a swig from before starting to make tea. Soon the hut was full of the sound and smell of sizzling sausage. Nobody said a thing while the giant was working, but as he slid the first 6 fat, juicy, slightly burnt sausages from the poker, Dudley fidgeted a little. Uncle Vernon said sharply, "Don't touch anything he gives you, Dudley." The giant chuckled darkly. "Your great pudding of a son don't need fattening any more. Don't you worry, Dursley." He passed the sausages to Harry, who was so hungry and never tasted anything so wonderful, but he still couldn't take his eyes off the giant. Finally, as nobody seemed to explain anything, he said, "I'm sorry, but I still don't really know who you are." The giant took a gulp of his tea and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Call me Hagrid," he said. "Everyone does. And like I told you, I'm keeper of the keys at Hogwarts. You know all about Hogwarts, of course." No," said Harry. Hagrid looked shocked. "Sorry," Harry said quickly. "Sorry," barked Hagrid, turning to stare at the Dursleys, who shrank back into the shadows. "It's them as should be sorry. I knew you weren't getting your letters, but I never thought you would know nothing about Hogwarts. For crying out loud, did you ever wonder where your parents learnt it all?" "All what?" asked Harry. "All what?" Hagrid thundered. "Now just wait 1 second." He had leapt to his feet. In his anger, he seemed to fill the whole hut the Dursleys were carrying against the wall. "Do you mean to tell me," he growled at the Dursleys, "that this boy knows nothing about anything?" Harry thought he was going a bit far. He had been to school, after all, and his marks weren't bad. I know some things," he said. "I can, do math and stuff." But Hagrid simply waved his hands and said, "About our world, I mean. Your world, my world, your parents' world." "What world?" Hagrid looked as if he was about to explode. "Dursley!" he boomed. Uncle Vernon, who had gone very pale, whispered something that sounded like Mimblewimple. Hagrid stared wildly at Harry. "But you must know about your mum and dad," he said. "I mean, they're famous. You're famous." "What? My mum and dad weren't famous, were they?" "You don't know? You don't know?" Hagrid ran his fingers through his hair, fixing Harry with a bewildered stare. "You don't know what you are?" he said finally. Uncle Vernon suddenly found his voice. "Stop!" he commanded. "Stop right there, sir. I forbid you to tell the boy anything." A braver man than the Vernon Dursley would have quailed under a furious look Hagrid gave him now. When Hagrid spoke, his every syllable trembled with rage. "You never told him? Never told him what was in the letter Dumbledore left for him? I was there. I saw Dumbledore leave it, Dursley, and you've kept it from him all these years." "Kept what from me?" said Harry eagerly. "Stop! I forbid you!" yelled Uncle Vernon in panic. Aunt Petunia gave a gasp of horror. "And go boil your heads, both of you," said Hagrid. "Harry, you're a wizard." There was a silence inside the hut. Only the sea and the whistling wind could be heard. "I'm a what?" gasped Harry. "A wizard, of course," said Hagrid, sitting back down on the sofa, which groaned and sank even lower. "And a thumping good un, I'd say. Once you've been trained up a bit, with the mum and dad like yours, what else would you be? I reckon it's about time you read your letter." Harry stretched out his hand at last to take the yellowish envelope addressed in green emerald to Mr. H. Potter, the floor, hut on the rock, the sea. He pulled out the letter and read, "Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster Albus Dumbledore, Order of Merlin, First Class, Grand Sorcerer, Chief Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, International Confed of Wizards. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on the 1st of September. We await your owl by no later than July 31st. Yours sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress." Questions exploded inside Harry's head like fireworks, and he couldn't decide which to ask first. A few minutes he stammered. "What does it mean? They wait my owl." "Galloping gorgons. That reminds me," said Hagrid, clapping a hand to his forehead with enough force to knock over a cart horse. And from another pocket inside his overcoat, he pulled an owl. A real, live, rather ruffled-looking owl. A long quill and a roll of parchment. With his tongue between his teeth, he scribbled a note, which Harry could read upside down. "Dear Mr. Dumbledore, given Harry his letter, taking him to buy his things tomorrow. Weather's horrible. Hope you're well. Hagrid." Hagrid rolled up the note, gave it to the owl, which clamped it in his beak, went to the door and threw the owl into the storm. Then he came back, sat down as though this was a normal thing as talking on the telephone. Harry realised his mouth was open and closed it quickly. "Where was I?" said Hagrid. But at that moment, Uncle Vernon, still ash-faced but looking very angry, moved into the firelight. "He's not going," he said. Hagrid grunted. "I'd like to see a great muggle like you stop him," he said. "A what?" said Harry, interested. "A muggle," said Hagrid. "It's what you call non-magic folk, like them. And it's your bad luck that you grew up in a family of the biggest muggles I've ever laid eyes on." We swore when we took him in, we'd put a stop to all that rubbish, said Uncle Vernon. Swore we'd stamp it out of him. Wizard indeed. You knew, said Harry. You knew that I'm a wizard? Knew? Shrieked Aunt Petunia suddenly. Knew? Of course we knew. How could you not be? My dratted sister being what she was? Oh, she got a letter just like you and disappeared off to that school and came home every holiday with her pockets full of frog spawn, turning teacups into rats. I was the only one who saw her for what she was, a freak. But my mother and father, oh no, it was Lily this and Lily that. They were proud of having a witch in the family. She stopped to draw a deep breath, and then went ranting on. It seemed she'd been waiting years to say all of this. Then she met that Potter at school. They left and got married and had you, and of course I knew you'd just be the same, just as strange, just as abnormal. And then, if you please, she went on and got herself blown up, and we got landed with you. Harry had gone very white. As soon as he found his voice, he said, Blown up? You told me they died in a car crash. Car crash? Roared Hagrid, jumping up so angrily that the Dursleys scuttled back to their corner. How could a car crash kill Lily and James Potter? It's an outrage, a scandal. Harry Potter not knowing his own story when every kid in our world knows his name. But why? What happened? Harry asked urgently. The anger faded from Hagrid's face. He suddenly looked anxious. I never expected this, he said in a low, worried voice. I had no idea when Dumbledore told me that there might be trouble getting hold of you, how much you didn't know. Ah, Harry, I don't know if I'm the right person to tell you, but someone's got to. You can't go off to Hogwarts not knowing. He threw a dirty look at the Dursleys. Well, it's best you know as much as I can tell you, mind. Can't tell you everything. That's a great mystery, parts of it. He sat down, stared into the fire for a few seconds, and then said, It all begins, I suppose, with a person called... But it's incredible you don't know his name. Everyone in our world knows. Who? Well, I don't like saying his name if I can help it. No one does. Why not? Gulping gargoyles, Harry. People are still scared. Blimey, this is difficult. See, there was this wizard who went bad as you could go. Worse and worse. His name was... Hagrid gulped, but no words came out. Could you write it down? Harry suggested. Nah, can't spell it. All right. Voldemort. Hagrid shuddered. Don't make me say it again. Anyway, this wizard, about 20 years ago now, started looking for followers. Got 'em too. Some were afraid. Some just wanted a bit of his power, because he was getting all the power. All right. Dark days, Harry. Didn't know who to trust. Didn't dare get friendly with strange wizards or witches. Terrible things happened. He was taking over. Of course, some stood up to him, and he killed them. Horribly. One of the only safe places left was Hogwarts. Reckoned Dumbledore's the only one you-know-who was afraid of. Didn't dare try and take in the school. Not just then, anyway. Now, your mum and dad were as good a witch or wizard as I ever knew. Head boy and girl at Hogwarts in the day. Suppose the mystery is why you-know-who tried to get him on his side before. Probably knew they were too close for Dumbledore to want anything to do with the dark side. Maybe he thought they could persuade him, or maybe he just wanted them out of the way. All anyone knows is he turned up in the village where you were all living on Halloween 10 years ago. You were just a year old. He came into your house, and Hagrid suddenly pulled out a very dirty spotted handkerchief and blew his nose with a sound like a foghorn. Sorry, he said, but it's that sad. I knew your mum and dad. Nice people you couldn't find. Anyway, you know who killed him. And then, and this is a real mystery of the thing, he tried to kill you too. Wanted to make a clean job of it, I suppose. Or maybe he just liked killing by then. But he couldn't do it. Never wondered how you got that mark on your forehead, Harry. That was no ordinary cut. That's what you got when a powerful, evil curse touches you. Took care of your mum and dad, and your house even, but didn't work on you. And that's why you're famous, Harry. No one ever lived after he decided to kill him. No one except you. And he killed some of the best witches and wizards of the age. The McGinnons, the Bones, the Pruitts. And you was only a baby, and you lived. Something very painful was going on in Harry's mind. As Hagrid's story came to a close, he saw again the blinding flash of green light, more clearly than he'd ever remembered it before. And he remembered something else. For the first time in his life, a high, cold, cruel laugh. Hagrid was watching him sadly. Took you from the ruined house myself, on Dumbledore's orders, brought you to this lot. Load of tosh, said Uncle Vernon. Harry jumped. He had almost forgotten that the Dursleys were there. Uncle Vernon certainly seemed to have got back his courage. He was glaring at Hagrid and his fists were clenched. "Now you listen here, boy," he snarled. "I accept that there's something strange about you, probably nothing a good beating wouldn't have cured. And as for all this about your parents, well, they were weirdos, no denying it, and worlds better off without them in my opinion. As for all they got, getting mixed up with these wizarding types, just what I expected. Always knew they'd come to a sticky end." But at that moment, Hagrid leapt from the sofa and drew a battered pink umbrella from inside his coat, pointing it at Uncle Vernon like a sword. He said, "I'm warning you, Dursley. I'm warning you. One more word." In danger of being speared on the end of an umbrella by a bearded giant, Uncle Vernon's courage failed again. He flattened himself against the wall and fell silent. "That's better," said Hagrid, breathing heavily and sitting back down on the sofa, which this time sagged right down to the floor. Harry, meanwhile, still had questions to ask, hundreds of them. "But what happened to you-know-who?" "Good question, Harry. Disappeared. Vanished. Same night he tried to kill you. Makes you even more famous. That's the biggest mystery, see? He was getting more and more powerful. Why'd he go? Some say he died. Codswallop, in my opinion. Don't know if he had enough human left in him to die. Some say he's still out there, biding his time. But I don't believe it. People who was on his side came back to ours. Some of them, kind of out of trances. Don't reckon they could have done if he was coming back. Most of us reckon he's still out there somewhere, but he lost his powers. Too weak to carry on. Caused something about you finishing him. Harry, there was something going on that night that he hadn't counted on. Don't know what it was. No one knows. But something about you stumped him. All right." Hagrid looked at Harry with warmth and respect blazing in his eyes. But Harry, instead of feeling pleased and proud, felt quite sure there'd been a horrible mistake. A wizard? Him? How could he possibly be? He'd spent his life being clouted by Dudley and bullied by Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon. If he was really a wizard, why hadn't they been turned into toads or warty toads every time they tried to lock him in his cupboard? If he'd once defeated the greatest sorcerer in the world, how come Dudley had always been able to kick him around like a football? "Hagrid," he said quietly, "I think you must have made a mistake. I don't think I can be a wizard." To his surprise, Hagrid chuckled. "Not a wizard, eh? Never made things happen when you were scared or angry?" Harry looked into the fire. Now he came to think about it. Every odd thing that had ever made his aunt and uncle furious had happened when Harry, had been upset or angry. Chased by Dudley's gang, he had somehow found himself out of their reach. Dreading going to school with that ridiculous haircut, he'd managed to make it grow back. And the very last time Dudley hit him, hadn't he got his revenge, even without realising he was doing it? Hadn't he set a boa constrictor on him? Harry looked back at Hagrid, smiling, and saw Hagrid was positively beaming at him. "See?" said Hagrid. "Harry Potter, not a wizard. You wait. You'll be right famous at Hogwarts." But Uncle Vernon wasn't going to give in without a fight. "Haven't I told you he's not going?" he hissed. "He's going to Stonewall High, and he'll be grateful for it. I've read those letters, and he needs all sorts of rubbish, spellbooks and wands, and..." "If he wants to go, a great muggle like you won't stop him, growled Hagrid. "Stop Lily and James's Potter's son from going to Hogwarts? You're mad. His name's been down ever since he was born. He's off to the finest school of witchcraft and wizardry in the world. 7 years there and he won't even know himself. He'll be with youngsters of his own sort, for a change, and he'll be under the greatest headmaster Hogwarts has ever seen, Albus Dumbledore." "I am not paying for some crackpot old fool to teach him magic tricks," yelled Uncle Vernon. But he had finally gone too far. Hagrid seized his umbrella, whirled it over his head. "Never," he thundered, "insult Albus Dumbledore in front of me!" He brought the umbrella swishing down through the air to point it at Dudley. There was a flash of violet light, a sound like a firecracker, and a sharp squeal, and the next second Dudley was dancing on the spot with his hands clasped over his fat bottom, howling in pain. When he turned his back on them, Harry saw a curly pig's tail poking through a hole in his trousers. Uncle Vernon roared, pulling Aunt Petunia and Dudley into the other room. He cast one terrified look at Hagrid and slammed the door behind them. Hagrid looked down at his umbrella and stroked his beard. "Shouldn't have lost me temper," he said ruefully. "Didn't work anyway. Meant to turn him into a pig. But I suppose he was too much like a pig anyway. Wasn't much left to do." He cast a sideways look at Harry under his bushy eyebrows. Be grateful if you didn't mention that to anyone at Hogwarts, he said. I'm not supposed to do magic, strictly speaking. I was allowed to do a bit to follow and get the letters to you and stuff. Oh, the reasons I was so keen to take on, one of the reasons I was so keen to take on the job. Why aren't you supposed to do magic? Asked Harry. Well, I was at Hogwarts myself, but I got expelled, to tell you the truth, in my 3rd year. They snapped me wand in half and everything, but Dumbledore let me stay on as gamekeeper. Great man, Dumbledore. Why were you expelled? It's getting late and we've got lots to do tomorrow, said Hagrid loudly. Got to get up to town, get all your books and that. He took off his thick black coat and threw it at Harry. You can kip under that, he said. Don't mind if it wriggles a bit. I think I still got a couple of dormice in one of the pockets. Oh, a good picture of the house. And that was the end of chapter 4. That was a little tough read there. So chapter 5 next week is called Diagon Alley. And I remember that being quite a long chapter. So I hope you enjoyed chapter 4. Stay tuned right away because I will be showing you how to make salt dough mandrakes. And you will learn what a mandrake is later on in the story, but we'll be making those after. So I will see you next week for chapter 5. Thanks for tuning in. If you've missed any of our other chapters, check out our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, search Gale Library Newton, and you will find all our videos recorded on there. So you can catch up on all chapters that you've missed. Take care, you guys. Have a great week, and I will see you next time. Hi friends, and welcome back to Harry Potter Wednesday. Hopefully you enjoyed chapter 4 of our Sorcerer's Stone Harry Potter Read Aloud. So you remember I told you we're going to make salt dough mandrakes. So here's a little picture of what I had in mind that we're going to be making today. So what you're going to need obviously is salt and you will also need all-purpose flour and water. You will need a mixing bowl, a clear cup or something to put your mandrake into. You could even use a plant pot, that would be very cool. And that's all you need. Oh, and I have some tools I bought my Harry Potter wand so that I could make some eyes and a pencil just because it's sharp at the end to help me add some features to my mandrake after. So all we need to do is we're going to get our bowl and the ingredients, you're going to, whatever you use, you halve the amount of salt. So I've got a cup of flour here, which means I just need half a cup of salt. So I'm going to put this whole cup of flour into my bowl, half a cup of salt, and then you have half a cup of water. So whatever the amount of salt you put in, you do the same water. But don't add it all together, because if you add it all together, you might make your mixture too runny. So add your salt and your flour, but then slowly stir in your water until it makes a dough-like consistency, which doesn't take very long. And you'll pretty much know very quickly when you've got enough, because it starts to look a little bit like Play-Doh. You don't want it too dry because you want to be able to manipulate it into the shapes that you want. And too wet, it will take ages to dry and you won't be able to use it very well. Okay, so I think I'm getting there. And you just need to knead it into your dough. So it will look a bit like cookie dough, but don't eat it because it will not taste good. It tastes very, very salty. And I know this because I have tasted it. I had to show my children that if they ate it, they may get a bit of a tummy ache. So I made a batch earlier that I'm just going to add to this one, just so I've got more. I didn't want to waste it, so I'm going to mix it all together. So now I've got quite a lot of salt dough. And it will start to look like a dough. So once you've made your dough, I'm going to move my bowl aside. I didn't need all of that water, so it's good to add it slowly. So what I'm going to do, as you can see, it's just a big ball of dough now. So I'm going to take my plastic cup and I'm going to add enough in the bottom to fill the cup and enough to poke out at the top to start my mandrake. So if you've read Harry Potter or if you've seen the movies, you will know that mandrakes do not want to come out of their pots. So they're very, very grumpy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my mandrake his twisty head and try and bend it over. So you can go for any shape you want for your mandrake. It can be, that's the good thing about this. You can have it however you want to do it. I'm going to give him some arms poking up. The most important thing I find about this this craft is the facial features on the mandrakes are what makes it look so cool. The twists and the turns and how you make the face look. So I kind of got the start of my mandrake here. Didn't want to come out. I'm going to give him some eyes. So it's very, very easy. I'm going to poke his nose out actually, so he's got a spiky nose. And then I'm going to give him a very grumpy face. So I'm just using my pencil to add the detail, as you can see. So that is it. So you can spend as much time as you want shaping and molding your mandrake to get it to look how you want it to look. Then what you need to do, because I've put mine in a plastic container, I can't cook it in the oven. Usually you would bake salt dough 200 degrees for a couple of hours until it goes hard. It also air dries very well. So I'm going to leave this to air dry for a week, and then I'm going to paint it so it looks more colorful and more brown. What I did also find is some leaves, because our mandrake needs leaves. So I think I'm going to put these maybe in his hands. I might change my mind later. And maybe one in one hand and one in the other. And there he is, my very grumpy mandrake pulled out of the ground, which I will paint later. So I hope you enjoyed that craft, you guys. Super easy to make, and they look really, really cool when they're done. So next week, join us for Harry Potter Chapter 5, where we'll be making floating candles. Bye. Take care.